I want to read to you a verse from Scripture which really blessed me a couple of days ago. It's simply this. It's again in the book of Colossians that the gentleman read earlier. And by the way, it's lovely to see Keith Swenson. Thank you to Jeff, who's the president. But when I came the first time, Keith was presiding over it. And Keith took us down the Grand Canyon, didn't sink us, in 2009. And Juliet and I had a wonderful trip with Keith, and I just so much honour all that he's done in the past and still doing, of course, with DSA. So great to see him. And many of you as well, whom I probably met then. Marianne, I'm not sure, she must have been, I don't know what age you were then, Marianne, but you don't look older than 21, so it can't be. There we go. Anyway, she's just got married anyway, and she's been also doing a great work in organising a lot of this visit. So thank you, Marianne, and to Scott for putting up with all the interruptions on the phone. Colossians 2:3 is what I want to read to you. And this is the verse. It says, "In whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge." What a verse. In whom are hid all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge, including all the engineering in the design of birds. How do I know that? Turn with me to, I've got it on my phone here because I was just wanting to read it to you, two verses here. So Colossians, I've just read Colossians 2:3, but now turn with me to Job chapter 12, verse 7. I know it includes the design of birds. Why? Because God says to Job, or rather Job is speaking, beg your pardon, God says to Job later on in chapter 38 onwards, as you know, he says, "Where were you, Job, when I made the world?" But here is Job saying, "Ask now the beasts, and they shall teach thee, and the fowl of the air, and they shall teach thee, they shall tell thee." So God has made it such that even in the design of the birds of the air, we have sufficient to know that God is there. Romans 1:20 says, "The invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead." And we're going to see that with flight today. I just wonder, I have a sense of awe when I see birds flying through the air like this bald eagle, which is the symbol of your nation. And, to say that these birds just came about by evolution is frankly denying the engineering marvels which are going on when we see birds take to the air. A bit further south from here, where Jeff is going, there is the NCAS Miramar, and they do a flying display, and I had the privilege of seeing it 3 years ago. And if you tell me whether there is design in these F-18s as they roar through the air. Then they do the knife edge pass. That was utterly dramatic when I saw it. I had always wanted to see the F-18s do their knife edge pass, and I had a gentleman down there who was looking after me for creation talks that I was doing there, and he gave me a grandstand view of seeing the F-18s. But that pales into insignificance when I now tell you what really is going on in bird flight. Of course, in building our aircraft was all due to these two men whose trade was bicycle makers from Dayton, Ohio. But they, of course, I love this, they, of course, took on the Smithsonian for the prize of flight. And, of course, the Smithsonian lost every time because they didn't look at the birds, whereas Wilbur and Orville, Wilbur particularly, was looking at the birds, making sure he understood how the birds worked. He carefully even did wind tunnel tests. I won't go into all the detail, but you could read all about it in the book. Can't remember the gentleman's name. He writes a lot of history of all sorts of Americans all over the place, and he's written the book on the Wright brothers, and it comes out in that. He went into all the detail as to how birds worked, and finally, successfully, as you all know, in 1903, on that cold morning in Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, the first Wright flyer took off and flew a distance of about half the length of a Boeing 747, but it was successful. And of course, the irony is that where does the Wright flyer sit today? Or at least the replica of the Wright flyer? In the Smithsonian. So I just find that really remarkable. The twists of history. But the Wright brothers understood that the birds had it. They knew that there was a sophisticated mechanism going on. Flight is not just jumping from a tower and hoping for the best. That's not going to work. Neither is it using lighter than aircraft, which the French got in on the act and thought that they'd achieved flight, but actually they hadn't, because they were, well, not cheating, but they were using a different system, which is ballooning. And of course that's fine, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about heavier than air flight. I just need to acknowledge that the New Zealander Robert Pearce did actually get in before the Wright brothers, but he didn't really have a controlled system. So it's still generally reckoned that the Wright brothers were indeed the first ones to achieve controlled flight of heavier than aircraft in 1903. We're going to look at these 7 things. We're going to look at feathers. We're going to look eventually at the amazing breathing, which is the internal aerodynamics of birds, right? So we're not just going to look on the external, we're going to look on the internal as well. I'm going to talk to you first of all about feathers. Location is absolutely important. This is the flight feather of a buzzard, right? I can tell immediately it's a flight feather of a buzzard because number one, it's asymmetric, so it is to do with the actual work being done by the air, and also in the technical term is it's a pennaceous feather, it's not a downy feather, but the important thing is that it's also curved, right? It's actually lost the top bit, but it's really meant to be like that, and it's heavily curved, and it's the flight feather of a buzzard. Now that feather cannot just go in any location. It has to go at the edge of the wing. Then you have secondary feathers, which are slightly more symmetric, but still not as curved, but they're still not totally symmetric. Then you have the tertiary feathers, you have covert feathers, greater coverts, medium coverts, lesser coverts. All the feathers have got to go in the right location. So it's not a matter of just having any old feather anywhere. But the other thing, and of course there'll be a test at the end, you've got to make sure that you actually understand all that. No, there won't be, but you might like to just note that there are some things which even when you're teaching aerodynamics, as I was for many years to my students at Leeds, you have to understand that the shape of the wing is important. You don't have to have a shaped wing, but it makes things a lot easier if you do. Because the whole idea is to bend the flow. And as soon as you bend the flow, there's got to be a reactive force, and that's what lift is. Lift is simply due to turning the flow, and there's got to be an equal and opposite reaction. Well, how does a bird do that? Well, birds do it by actually building a wing with feathers sideways, okay? Now, I just crudely put in feathers there just to show you. But actually, it's a matter of having the bone structure and then the feathers placed such that you get a curved surface looking like an aerofoil. When I took this picture of a white-tailed eagle in Scotland, it really showed this surface. Look at the power of this white-tailed eagle. It's getting on for 7.5 feet wide wingspan. Absolutely dramatic bird. They were reintroduced into Scotland from Scandinavia, and you can see the power of the leading edge here that I'm talking about. We'll come to the winglets as well, which eagles naturally have. This one particularly shows it. As you can see, the curved surface of the leading edge. Brilliant aerodynamics produced essentially by feathers. So feathers you cannot just put anywhere, and feathers don't come from reptiles. Now look, I'm going to publicly make a statement here. I do not take the view that we actually put birds into the same classification as reptiles. I don't think there's any such thing as feathered dinosaurs, right? I do not take that position. Some people are in the creation community, I'm not going to name names, but my understanding is that feathers not only do brilliant aerodynamics, they actually provide heat, well, they protect, or they help the bird to actually keep to the right temperature, because birds are not cold-blooded. Now the answer might come, well, we don't know that dinosaurs were always cold-blooded, and so on and so forth. But to be frank, everything is indicating that whenever you see feathers, even in the fossil record, they were just birds, right? Anything with fully developed feathers like that, not fur, I'm not talking about that. Like in the Chinese fossils, sometimes you have to be careful. There are some creatures which clearly have feathers, but we don't have such birds today, like the Caudipteryx, okay? There's no such bird as far as we know today. There's no such bird as the Archaeopteryx that we know existed in the past. But they were clearly birds because they had feathers. There are actually other creatures which really, to be frank, are just fur. So, of course, those within our community, to be fair to them, I'm not saying that there is any evolution going on. They're just simply trying to say, oh, well, there could have been other creatures which had feathers. I personally don't think that that's the case. I think all feathers are to do with birds, right? That's the position I come to, particularly because of this heat transfer issue, that feathers not only provide aerodynamics, they provide a heating and a protection of the bird. And reptiles, as you well know, they got to actually sit out in the sunshine in order to get as much heat as possible to get them going. Feathers would be in the way, okay? So feathers are made of keratin. They're made of the same material as the fingernails that you have on the hair on your head, which I used to have, and that keratin, it's reckoned by this Japanese chap, has somehow caused scales to change into feathers, which are also made of keratin. So is that true? No, it's false. It's actually patently false. Because as David Menton, who does excellent articles and also was talking on flight for many years, he points out that feathers grow from a follicle. And the follicle is actually just below the skin, and it is a totally different part of the skin than scales on reptiles. And what I'm going to do is just to show you what goes on with a feather. Thank you very much. Thank you ever so much. Okay, this feather, which I'm now going to put into this big pen, right, will illustrate the point as to what a follicle does. The feather actually grows in a little follicle which has got the bottom part connected to the flesh of the bird here, right? So that bottom part is connected to the flesh of the bird, and the follicle grows from inside this sheath. This might help you to understand it. There is a growth collar there at the bottom, and the feather emerges from this follicle, which is much, much thinner than this big pen sheath here, okay? It's very, very thin indeed, and it just crumbles away when the feather has got into place. Let me just play you this so that you can see what's going on. So the feather emerges inside the sheath and then is actually placed in the right place on the bird. This is a wing of a pigeon. It fell out of a tree, so Juliet and I called it Humpty Dumpty, and sadly it didn't live because we hadn't realized that we needed to feed the poor creature on sugar water, a bit like you feed hummingbirds. If we'd known that, we could have probably had that bird survive for a bit longer. But the wing of this bird really shows the first feathers coming out of the sheath, right? This follicle which actually grows from inside the flesh of the bird, and then the feather is put in place in the right location on the wing without getting confused with the other feathers which are also growing. And it's a marvelous mechanism. A follicle is an amazing design in its own right. Okay, but now let's consider feathers themselves. When we actually blow up the picture of a feather, it actually looks like this. But the diagram that I'm showing you here just explains what's going on. So you've got barbs here, like the barb on this small feather here, and the big one that I had earlier, okay? Now these barbs, I'm now going to talk about how those barbs stay together. These are the barbs, right? This is the main rachis, or the stem of the feather. These are the barbs. Now look what happens when I pull on these barbs. I can separate them, right? But the amazing thing is, I can also bring them back together again. What's going on? I can do it somewhere else, right? I can pull it apart, and just with a little bit of slight moisture maybe, I can make that come back together again, and the feather is ready to go again. What's going on? Well, the key is that at the microscopic level, there is amazing hook and barbule system going on. This is the barbs that I've just been separating out. There's one barb, there's another, right? And in between the barbs, you can see, if you look carefully at this feather, you can actually see against the light, if you hold it to the light, you can actually see a furriness on both sides of one barb and then, of course, of the adjacent barb. So we're talking about that furriness is actually barbules. On one side it's hooks, and on the other side it is ridges. Do you understand me? Those of you, mainly probably ladies, who put up curtains on curtain rails, you understand that the curtains have hooks on, right? And the curtain rails obviously support the curtain hooks. Well, it's a bit like that here. You've actually got hooks, right, on one coming from one barb, and coming from the other barb going in the other direction are curtain rails, for want of a better term. So the curtain hooks slide over the curtain rails. Every time this feather is being moved like that, that's what's going on. It's a brilliant system which works no problem. Who decided that the barbules coming on the left have hooks and the barbules coming on the right have ridges? Well, you know what the answer is. There has to be a mind behind even the design of one feather. This feather, even though it's lightweight, is sufficient to knock over the monolith of evolutionary sophistry. This feather shows to the world that God is, and has demonstrated that he is. Nobody can face God on the last day and say that there is no mind behind what he has done. He might just say to them, did you ever pick up a feather? That's all you need to prove that there is a mind behind this wonderful creation of birds. So feathers, what else do you need if you've got a sliding joint? Everybody, you engineers here, what do you need if you've got a sliding joint? There's something else you're going to need with feathers. Lubricant, and the bird needs oil. Where does a bird get its oil from? Well, it actually gets it from the base of its spine where there is a preening gland. Would we like to do a little exercise this morning? Turn your head 180 degrees so it points that way, and bend yourself over and get the equivalent of a beak, which is your nose, onto the base of your spine, and you won't be able to do it. Because birds also have a specially made neck which enables them to do that. Sometimes they roost. You'll sometimes see them with their heads just simply lying on their back. And they will sit like that all night, and their feet automatically grip the twigs, which I'm not going to go on to, but that again is an amazing feature. Feathers, by the way, as I said earlier, are the same in the fossil record. Here's an Archaeopteryx feather, and there is no doubt that Archaeopteryx has exactly the feathers that we have today. On that feather, you can see it's a secondary feather because it's not as curved. It's asymmetric, but it's a secondary feather of an Archaeopteryx. Birds like Archaeopteryx, you can see, had primary, secondary, and tertiary feathers. Reckoned to be 125 million years old. I don't accept that for a moment. I'm sure that you'll understand why I'm doing this. I'm saying that even if you did, feathers have not changed much. The other feather is found in resin, which has hardened, and it's there showing that the resin from trees is amber. Sorry, forgive me, my mind just went a blank then. So this amber has trapped a feather in itself, and it shows you that that feather is no different to a modern feather. Archaeopteryx, you can see there, all these curved wings clearly shows that it was a good flyer and it was not a halfway creature. The fact that it's got teeth in its mouth, and the fact that it's got a bony tail is no issue. It just simply means that in the past there was a greater variety of birds, some of which did have teeth and some of which also had bony tails. There is absolutely no evidence here for the gradual evolution of birds. I'm not going to show you the Chinese fossils, but I have commented on them earlier. So when Richard Dawkins was asked, and I won't play it now, but there is a little clip here which we could play, but I'm not going to play it just at this moment. I'm going to actually turn that off. But when he was asked on the origins of the feather, he says, "I suppose it is a matter of faith on my part," because he could not see any reason why a scale should suddenly produce the amazing structure of a feather. I want to now go on to consider the next issue, which is that flight needs control. I've mentioned this already, that flight needs control, when I spoke about the Wright brothers. And they very quickly, of course, had set the trend for the development of wings which could be easily manipulated and turned and go in any direction that the pilot wished. Today, we don't do it the same way. When they were building their planes, they actually had a canvas or a cloth or some kind over a wooden structure, and they warped the wings. And Wilbur and Olver, when they were showing off their Wright Flyer, would actually pull a rope on one side and twist this wing, changing its shape, maybe making the lift slightly greater on that wing, and then do the opposite on this wing, and enabled it to control, to do a controlled roll. And then they had, as you probably realize, their tail plane was not at the back, it was actually at the front, and the rudder, though, was at the back. And so that was the very crude, but it worked very well, control system that they used. Today, of course, we don't do that. We actually have flaps at the back of a wing in order to increase the lift, and we have ailerons which actually enable the wing to roll, and one goes up and the other one goes down, and you have a rolling motion. So we also have forward flaps on modern aircraft which enable you to actually change the surface of the wing. Compare that with birds, like this wonderful picture of a swan. You can see the heavily cambered wing, which is very important for birds, just like aircraft, at low speed. And it does it without any problem. It actually just simply uses muscles to change the shape of the wing. There is no crude screws going out to actually turn the flaps down of a swan. To be frank, everything is telling you that there is magnificence in the way that a bird is constructed, because the muscles which are controlling those wings are powerful enough, but also sleek enough to actually add to the aerodynamics. They're often actually, those muscles are lying in the fore part of the wing, the front part of the wing, in order to control the shape of those wings. Then there's other muscles that I'm going to mention later. Flight of birds is magnificent. They can change their shape at will. This is taken by my friend Bob Buckley in Scotland, and the gannets actually can change the shape of their wing in a moment. Just see this set of photographs which have been overlaid one on the other to see the motion of a gannet as it comes down to catch fish. It starts off with its wings out, and then it brings them in such that it comes down like a pencil. Look at this. See, the wings are out, then it comes in, goes straight into the water like a pencil to grab the fish that it's seen from quite some height above. These photographs are very well done by Bob, and it shows the amazing ability to change wing shape really at will with the bird. although it's not quite as obvious in the change of shape, let me just show you these pictures of white-tailed eagles that I took again in Scotland. And it shows you the magnificence of the flapping motion, in this case of the white-tailed eagle. And you see that the bird is actually able to propel itself using very powerful muscles which are connected all along the leading edge of the wing. But birds also have other control systems. Did you know that all birds, even this mourning warbler shown here, have tiny little feathers connected to the thumb of the skeleton of the hand, which is supporting the outer wing. A bird flies really from its elbow. There is only a small humerus which is really tucked inside in the body of the bird. The bird essentially flies by using this radius and ulna, which controls the first part of the wing and along which that muscle lies to actually change the shape. And then this hand is much bigger on a bird, comes right out here, okay? And there's 5 fingers, the pentadactyl structure, and then this little thumb here actually controls these extra feathers, which we call the alula feathers. And this enables there to be a leading edge flap, effectively, on a bird. So a bird, when it's flying, is actually doing this motion. The eagle that I showed you earlier was doing this, basically from its elbow. But remember that the hand extends much further out. The fact that it has a pentadactyl structure, 5-fingered structure, doesn't mean that it's evolved from some other creature. It just simply means it's a very good design, and it's used as in birds as well as in other creatures. Just to show you this alula feathers, here they are in this grey heron. You can actually see the leading edge flap which birds have. That's remarkable. So that means that when the bird is flying at low speed, rather than the wing stalling, extra energy is brought from underneath the wing, from air which would have gone underneath the wing, and it's pushed over the leading edge. And technically, this is what's happening in technical terms, it's re-energizing the upper flow to stop it separating and stop the wing from stalling. That's, of course, what leading edge flaps do in aircraft that we have today, such as this Airbus A310. And you can see the leading edge slat, which is what I'm referring to for alula feathers. You'll also notice that most aircraft today, Boeing, Airbus, and all the others, are producing airliners with winglets. But who had winglets to begin with? Well, it's the birds. As we saw earlier, the eagle and other birds of prey in particular have these winglets at the end. Why do birds have winglets? Actually, Boeing has cottoned on to this big time, because the Boeing 777, or the Boeing 787, I should say, the carbon fiber plane, and the Airbus A350 actually have wings which bend considerably, right? In fact, you could take a 787 wing and you could bend it almost such that the tip was almost vertical and it still wouldn't break. They know full well that this is a good way to do things, because if you have a curved wing, it reduces the induced drag. It's one of the ways of reducing drag, which you always get from a finite wing, because at the end of a finite wing, you get spinning air, which is due to the fact that you've got lift and it's got to go somewhere. It's due to a vortex going over the wing, and then at the end of the wing it comes off and it produces a massive vortex, which is losing energy from the wing. Well, the way to actually reduce that is either to put winglets at the end, which is the traditional way now of most airliners in the last 20 years, to reduce the energy loss at low speed when the aircraft's coming into land. That's mainly when you actually are using winglets to great effect. Or the other way is, as Boeing have done, is to actually have a 787 wing which actually naturally curves anyway, which is pretty neat. And they've also now got on the treble 7X, the new treble 7. It's actually got hingeable winglets at the end, which is also a bit neat. Well, it's more for actually making sure that the wing, which is so large, doesn't get in the way of other aircraft. That's the main reason it's hinged, when it's actually landed and parked. But now let me talk about hovering. You can see the Alula feather on this American kestrel, which is a bit more colourful than its European cousins. But what I want to particularly draw attention to is that kestrels hover. You have a number of birds which hover, which I'm coming to, which of course are the hummingbirds. But let me just mention kestrels. Kestrels do an amazing motion, which is flicking the ends of their wings like this, okay? And you'll see them doing this probably at about 50 to 60 times per second, a bit like the speed of a hummingbird wing, but they're not using the same principle as a hummingbird. As you can see here, a kestrel is balancing itself against the tail feathers. So on the one hand, it's flicking its wings like that. So if I was the bird, I'd be wanting to tip over. Well, it stops itself from tipping over by spreading out its tail feathers at the back. That's a marvelous, clever, aerodynamic way of staying stationary in the air. So it can do it in a very high wind. We've seen it do it on the Isle of Arran. We saw some kestrels doing this, and they were in a 25-mile-an-hour wind. Estimated it was blowing quite a gale, as it often does in Scotland. And the kestrel was just staying stationary in this very high wind, looking for voles and mice and whatever it was going to feed on down below. So that is one way to actually achieve hovering flight. But of course, the one that really does it is hummingbirds. And I was privileged to see this in Seattle, to get some of these photographs. I believe it's either a young Anna's hummingbird, or else it's a female. But of course, Anna's hummingbird usually has a red throat, but it's possible that it's a female. I haven't quite identified it, but it's not the usual cream one all over. It's got this black chin, and it's not a black chin one either, which when I looked up all the pictures, it didn't fit either. So this shows the wonder of hummingbird flight. We all love looking at them. I'm sure you put up your sugar feeders. I wish we had them in Europe. I'd be sat there glued to the pane in the summer watching them come. And these hummingbirds, though, are doing something utterly marvelous. They are the real acrobats of the air, the aerobatic marvels of hummingbirds, because what they are doing with their wings is extraordinary. Remember, I said that the wing is coming out essentially from the elbow, right? If you look at a hummingbird wing, it's basically, although the wrist is there, it's not really being used, okay? The whole wing is locked, as it were, from the elbow. But everything is being done by the movements at the elbow, and it has a special joint, which is different to other birds, enabling the radius and the ulna to twist right over and to actually get the wing such that it's almost going, it's come right over, and now the trailing edge is acting like the leading edge of the wing. And it gets a stroke even when it's turned over, as well as when it's the right way up. And the motion is like this, such that the tip is making a figure of 8 motion. So it's going like this, twisting over, and then it gets another bang for its buck. Even on what normally would have been considered the upstroke, it's actually getting a power stroke as it twists the wing over. So it's constantly doing this, get this, at least 50 to 60 times per second, and usually in hovering flight, it's going above that, creeping up to 100 times per second. It's been recorded that in normal flight, hummingbirds will sometimes get up to 150 times per second. And the maximum that has ever been recorded is when a male is demonstrating to its female that he's the best, and it will do a dive and it will beat its wings in such a way as to create a noise at 200 cycles per second with its wings. These are just phenomenal, birds doing aerobatics. They're the F-18s of birds, except they're so small, and of course they're not going supersonic like F-18s can do. But the tip, right, is shown in this movement here. And if you want to know more about this, it's all in this big book that I'm going to advertise now. In the chapter on birds, there's a whole section on flights of insects as well, a talk which I did last night. But there is a whole section here on birds and their feathers, and you can enjoy this book. It's $35. There's the bit on hummingbirds, and there is a section on all sorts of creatures which Stuart Burgess and myself have written about. The book's about to be published also in America. These have been imported from England, but the book also goes on to talk about astronomy and many other things, birdsong, mathematics and beauty, all sorts of things. So this is a lovely coffee table book. That's why it was written. But it's not just the pictures, although I hope you'll enjoy the pictures. That's what's put the cost up slightly. But it's also meant to be full of good facts which you could have your families buried in, and any visitors who perhaps are not Christians who visit you at the home, they can just pick it up, start flicking it through, and it's a conversation starter. So hummingbirds are amazing. Here's a picture that was taken showing the male blue-throated hummingbird with its twisted wings going right back. Absolutely marvelous. This must have been taken at least at 1,000, 1,500 pictures per second in order to get the clarity of those wings, which generally are blurred when you take a picture, as I did. What are hummingbirds doing? Well, they're doing something very similar to what I spoke about last night with insect flight. By the way, at the back, there are all sorts of DVDs that you can get. And the DVD of this talk is here, which is the Intricacies of Flight. That is $5 at the back. But there's another one here. Oh, I thought I had it. Obviously didn't pick it up. But there's another one which is on insect flight. And they are probably the ones that you'll want to get most of all. There are lots of other DVDs as well, including the DVD of the talk that I'm about to do, second talk, which is The Wonder of Hearing. There's many other things which are on the bookstore at the back. Those DVDs are $5. But the vortex rings of hummingbirds are an amazing feature of what is going on. What is actually happening is that as the bird, which is essentially almost standing up in the air, right? As the bird is doing this motion, right? Remember, it's twisting its wings as it's flying. Look at the picture on the right. What I want to particularly draw your attention to is as the wing comes forward, right? There is a trailing vortex coming off. And if you work it out, the trailing vortex is actually almost horizontal. When it actually then puts its wings back, you'd have thought, oh, that's not going to produce a trailing vortex. Actually, it does. And it adds to that vortex, and it leads to a tunneling of flow down in the opposite direction to the ground, okay? So it's hugely difficult to explain this, but if you imagine my hand is the wing, right? As the wing comes by, right, then there is a trailing vortex such that there is air coming off like that, okay? But then as it moves the wing the other way, it is also causing a vorticity in the air. Because of the twisting of the wing, it actually causes there still to be a twisting. So it's actually adding to the vorticity that it's made on the previous stroke. And effectively it makes vortex donuts, right? But this bird doesn't eat donuts, just in case you're going to be tempted to put those in the water. But they actually, therefore, create a massive tunnel of spinning air, which makes them able to just sort of stand in the middle of it, which is frankly amazing. But it's doing it so fast that you cannot actually understand it just by looking at them. All you see is just this sudden movement of the hummingbird, which of course we're all familiar with. If you want to know more about this, I'm sorry I haven't got these DVDs with me, but these DVDs are actually available from refractedglory.com, where David Reeves and the name of Benjamin, can't remember his surname, but there's two lads. David Reeves is the presenter, and then there's another gentleman who actually produced these. And if you look on that website, you can actually get all the information you need about hummingbirds. And there is actually other people on there who are not necessarily convinced on creation, but they are interviewed, and they actually show on that DVD the wonder of the way hummingbirds work. And everything is pointing, of course, to the wonder of design of these creatures. Because imagine a hummingbird trying to get its food. If it didn't have this long tongue, which I'm now going to talk about, it wouldn't be able to get the nectar. In order to have that long tongue, it needs the long beak as well to guide it into the right place. It needs the ability to hover. Just take these two facts. It's also got all the other things that I mentioned about the barbules being right on the barbs. And of course, for a hummingbird's feather, it's absolutely wee, right? It is so tiny, the actual feather, and then the barbs are even tinier, and the barbules are minuscule, such that you need a microscope to see them. But it's got all these wonderful structures. But just take these two things, that it's got to have the long beak and the tongue in order to get the nectar, and it's also got to have the ability to hover. Supposing it didn't have the long beak, but it did have the ability to hover, well, it wouldn't be able to get the nectar, would it? You know, just be poking its head into a fuchsia or whatever, and it wouldn't get the food that it needs. But supposing the opposite is true, that it's got the long beak, but it hasn't got the ability to hover. It comes in at 25 miles an hour and it goes straight through the other side. That's the end of that evolutionary experiment. So, I mean, it sounds laughable, but seriously, that is the issue with flight. Flight doesn't work unless a number of things are operating together. We call this the principle of irreducible complexity. Nothing will work unless everything works, and particularly is true in flights. You can't just have one wing one side and hope a few minutes later another wing will develop. A few hours later, you'll be dead. So, and you mustn't just have two wings. You need the tail plane as well. Okay, you need control surfaces. You need all these other things with the wings in order to be able to operate properly. Hummingbirds, coming back to this tongue, have this ability to stay almost vertical that I was talking about earlier, then to stick their tongue out, ready to get at the nectar. But a recent film showed this, and I'm just going to play this to you to show the amazing tongue of a hummingbird. It's not a set of straws which they suck from, okay? That is not what's going on. This was particularly demonstrated in a film from the Discovery Institute, of which this is a clip.
The hummingbird's tongue is about twice as long as its beak, so it can reach deep into a flower. And until recently, many scientists believed that the birds relied heavily on capillary action to draw the nectar through their tongues and into their mouths. Kind of like water spontaneously rising up a thin straw in a glass. But some fascinating discoveries at the University of Connecticut have shown that the mechanisms involved are much more dynamic than anyone realized. The hummingbird's tongue is actually a nectar trap, equipped with a pair of narrow tubes that taper sharply. The tip of each tube is segmented into a row of flaps that are attached to a supporting rod.
And this all came about by random mutation?
These flaps form two rows of closed loops that fit compactly into the beak. But when the hummingbird feeds, its tongue undergoes a dramatic transformation. Inside the flower, the tongue extends to make contact with the nectar. When immersed in fluid, the tip splits, and the flaps on each fork systematically unfurl.
That is just amazing.
Then, as the tongue is withdrawn, the flaps close tightly to seal and capture the nectar for delivery into the bird's mouth.
Let the fowls of the air teach you. That is just fantastic. Wouldn't you agree with me? This is just amazing what God has done, right? There's no way that you could develop that system by random mutations, because there's a little tiny problem. If the hummingbird doesn't have that tongue, it won't be able to feed, in which case it would be dead. And you can't have evolution operate on dead creatures, right? Now look, let me tell you that all birds, including hummingbirds, have light bones. Well, I say all, except for some diving birds, right? Like the loon bird in Canada, and you have it also in the north here. I'm not sure whether you have it on the northwest here. You certainly have it in the northeast, in New York State and other places. In the cold conditions and the cooler conditions, you have these birds which dive, and they will have a bone structure which they might have the forward part of the bird still has a hollow structure, but certainly the rear bones will be solid. In fact, just to show you, I know it's true of the Northwest, because I've seen the tufted puffin in Alaska trying to take off, and it has a great lot of difficulty because it hasn't got proper hollow bones, so it flaps its legs like that, eventually gets off the ground, but only just manages to take off. That was in Alaska some years ago that we saw that. So, but many birds and most birds will have this light structure. Let me just show you this, that the bird's bones are hollow, right? Which 90% of birds will have this hollow structure. And in order to give strength, you have a Warren's truss arrangement going on inside the bone in order to give it strength. So it's not just hollow and that's it. It's actually got strength as well from the cross structure. Unlike our bones, which of course are solid and important because we're based on land, of course. Now, those bones support special muscles. Now, this is where the Creator has really done a marvel, because most birds, of course, in cruise conditions have their shape is obviously that they're lying essentially flat on the air and doing this motion, okay? Now, in order to operate the muscles to drive the wing movement, you've got to have quite a lot of weight for the muscles, which we're now going to refer to. Guess where the muscles are? Underneath the bird, which gives it stability in flight. If all the weight was on the top, then the bird would fall over itself, okay? Now, these muscles, I'm going to show you, are attached to the breastbone. The technical term is the sternum bone, okay? They have a large, widened sternum here, right at the front, this breastbone. And connected to that breastbone are these two muscles, one of which we have, which is the pectoralis major muscle that you used to punch your sister when she was young, and she punched you back, okay? Or else you used it to play tennis, all right? Or else you used it for swimming. You do have another muscle to lift your humerus bone, okay? But that is on the back, and it's very difficult for us to do backstroke. It's very difficult for us to do that motion. but not for a bird, because a bird has another muscle underneath called the supracoracoideus muscle. You can say it quickly and get used to it, you know. It's quite a complicated word, but if you break it up, it's supra, which means above, coracoid. It goes through the coracoid, which is the equivalent of the shoulder. A bird doesn't have a similar structure to us or to reptiles. It doesn't really have a shoulder blade as such. It has, though, a coracoid system, which is where the scapula connects with the humerus, and the tendon from the supracoracoideus muscle is threaded through from the front such that this ligament now pulls from the back, such that when this muscle shortens, it does that motion, okay? So it's an extremely strong muscle. And when you have Thanksgiving next month, right, and you have the bird on its back, it's dead, I hope, and you don't like sushi birds, but you cut against the first muscle, sorry to be graphic, but when you're carving, you carve against this muscle, and you'll probably notice that underneath is another muscle, and you see it slipping away. Well, that muscle is the one that I'm referring to. It's the supracoracoideus muscle, and it means effectively that there are two muscles which are operating in tandem from the same bone. It's a brilliant system. Look at this, which is again produced by the Discovery Institute. You can see the pectoralis major pulling it down, and the other muscle underneath is pulling the wing up. So here we are again. Here's the muscle pulling it down, and here's the other muscle, which is the supracoracoideus muscle, pulling it up. So these two muscles are operating in tandem and are connected to the breastbone in a stable condition. The weight is underneath. Now we come to breathing. Did you know that birds breathe in an entirely different system certainly to us, and I would say to most reptiles? I have to use the word most because it's been alleged that alligators have a similar lung system to birds. I'm not convinced personally, but some people have tried to suggest they do. And I'm going to show you that even if they do, there is a big problem in what they suggest, because they're trying to say, of course, that birds evolved from some reptile. A bird breathes using a counterflow mass exchanger. We use a system where we breathe air in and it comes to a dead stop. The air comes down the bronchiole into alveoli tubes and eventually comes to a dead stop, and the blood is, of course, giving off carbon dioxide, which we then breathe out. We breathe in, we breathe out using the two lungs that God has given us. You can rely on one, but if you haven't got them, that means that's the end, okay? We need to actually bring the air into a dead stop. The blood then gives off the carbon dioxide, and the air, of course, that we breathe in brings the oxygen to our blood. Not so for a bird. A bird breathes using a totally different system. A bird takes the air in, but it does not come to a dead stop. It keeps on going, right? Here it is, comes in, and the air comes in, and it causes the blood coming through the other way to actually pick up the oxygen from the air, and it gives off carbon dioxide as it meets the air initially in that lung. So it's passing through like this, and the blood is not stopping, neither is the air stopping, okay? So the air keeps on going, it never comes to a stop. So this means that you haven't got inflated lungs like we have and then deflated, and that means that, sorry, if you're a bird lover, if your pet parrot dies, that's it. Because you wouldn't be able to do artificial respiration, kiss of mouth stuff. You'll never get your bird back again. I'm sorry, right? So don't try it. The air comes in and it goes initially, when the bird breathes, into a rear air sac, okay? So it goes to the back. Then the bird breathes out and some air comes out from an earlier packet of air, and this packet of air that we're following goes through the lung like I've just described. Then the bird breathes in again, and another packet of air goes to the back, and this packet of air goes to a front air sac, and finally it breathes out, okay? So this bird is actually constantly got air on the move. It's an amazing system, such that the air is never stopping, and air sacs and hollow bones are used also to store air, particularly when the bird is going into the water and obviously can't breathe through its mouth. So a bird, in order to operate this, doesn't have a diaphragm. Did you know that? No diaphragm. So the idea that an alligator could, or an alligator-like creature could have changed into a bird is frankly absurd. Because alligators, even if they are proved to have a continuous flow lung, like I've just described, they do have a diaphragm, just like we do. And they operate their breathing system using a muscle, a diaphragm. Whereas a bird doesn't use a diaphragm. It uses its sternum bone. It pushes it out and it pushes back in again. It's got a movable breastbone. Well, we can move our breastbone a little, but you can't move it like a bird does. And in order to cope with some of the issues of moving the breastbone, there are hinged ribs in birds, such that all this will work without any difficulty. It does not break its bones. Well, very lastly, I need to deal with migration. Why do birds fly south in winter? Because it's too far to walk. That's what somebody said. Well, birds fly in all sorts of ways as they migrate. Canada geese will sometimes fly, and often do fly, in a V formation. And that's due to the spinning vortices, remember I mentioned, that come away from each wing. Well, the birds know this, and they know that if they pack them together, they use less energy as a flock than they do as all individuals flying in the same direction. So the bird doing the most work is the one at the front, and the bird behind is just placing its wing just at the point where there is air coming up as a result of the first bird's spinning air coming off the wing. And then the same happens in the bird behind, and so on. These birds will migrate some considerable distances. The one which probably flies the most in migration is the Arctic tern, which flies from the North Pole to the South Pole and then back again 6 months later, such that an Arctic tern will have done 12,000 miles a year. Average length of the age of a bird, you know, the lifespan of an Arctic tern is about 25 to 30 years. And if you work it out, it's gone to the moon and back in its lifetime. The one which I find really interesting is the Pacific golden plover, because that flies from these parts and even Alaska, and will fly down to Hawaii, a distance of 3,000 miles. But the difference with the Arctic tern is this one is doing it non-stop. And if you work it out, if you're going to go that distance over 3,000 miles of water, all pilots know that they've got to get their fuel right. They must have enough fuel to get there. But actually, if you stack up too much fuel, right, you make your plane too heavy. So the bird, whose fuel is its muscles, it must eat enough to get there, but it mustn't eat too much, which is sometimes our problem, such that we end up in the drink, okay? So there is a window between eating enough and not too much. But get this, the real issue is adults go first, and the young ones who've never been to Hawaii before make the journey on their own. I find that a wonder. We haven't yet worked out what is going on there. Somehow the genetic information of where Hawaii is somehow hardwired into these birds, and that they've got to make it as soon as not long after they've been born. The one which makes the longest flight of all is the bar-tailed godwit, which flies 7,700 miles non-stop from Alaska to New Zealand. And it does it in 6 days. Usually takes us 14 hours, but then we're going in a somewhat different way, right? But this bird flies through the day and night, 6 days, and it gets to somewhere in New Zealand, obviously not necessarily Auckland, but it does it in a marvelous way. I'm behind time. Sorry about that break earlier. I'll just briefly mention murmurations, which is my last point. Murmurations are a staggering feat of some birds. I mentioned the blue angels earlier, which fly in tight formation, and they have to be exceedingly careful not to collide with one another. Well, birds also do the same, but this time not 6 planes or whatever it is flying in formation. This is 300,000 starlings all flying together. You can find these videos on YouTube. Other birds do it. Even Canada geese have been shown to fly in flocks like this. And they will fly causing wonderful shapes, which are a wonder to behold. Nobody's quite worked out who is the leader in this, right? Although it has been worked out that each bird is actually conscious of the birds close to it and is constantly making movements to avoid colliding. But it's an amazing thing to see. It is believed that birds do it to avoid being preyed on by peregrine falcons, which like to feed on starlings. But of course the falcons and the birds of prey get totally confused because they cannot home in on one bird and grab the bird from the air like they would usually. So I suggest to you, friends, that everything is telling us that just as God said to Job, does the hawk fly by your wisdom and stretch her wings towards the south? Have you an arm like God, or can you thunder with a voice like him? Deck yourself now with majesty and excellency, and array yourself with glory and beauty. Now, everything is telling us what God has done. The wonder of what he has made. He made the flying creatures, and I think he did this deliberately, before he made the land creatures. Evolution tries to say that flying creatures came from land creatures. God says, oh, no, no, no. I made the flying creatures first. You need to understand, you men who think that you know more than I do, you need to understand what I have done. Everything indicates the wonder of the design of birds. Glorifies, of course, the brilliant engineer who made everything. Without him was not anything made that was made. But let me say this as I close. The greatest thing of all is that the same creator became my savior. The same creator who created the stars in a moment on the 4th day, the work of his fingers, bared his right arm to redeem us from our guilt. The glory is to the God of creation, Revelation 4, and it's the Lord Jesus Christ who is worshipped at the end of Revelation 4. But if you turn to Revelation 5, it says the same person, worthy is the Lamb that has redeemed us. He went to the cross that we might be forgiven. Let us give him, the Lord Jesus Christ, all the glory for creation, but particularly for redeeming us from our sin.